Welcome to the Flagrant Foul Fantasy Sports Podcast. This podcast will focus on three major sports: the NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA. I am the host, Braden Eller, and will lead each episode. Some will be just me and the listeners, and some will feature guests that are friends, other fantasy podcasters, and who knows else moving forward. Thank you ahead of time for listening. This first episode will be focused on quarterback grouping, their ADP, and their rankings going into the 2024 NFL season. But before I begin, I want to talk a little bit about what sports means to me. Sports has been a passion of mine since I was a little kid. Whether playing in the game or watching in person or at home growing up, I loved watching what the competitive nature of sports brought to the table. As I got older, I learned that sports can be many things for many people. It can be a great unifier. I needed distraction and a place to make lasting connections. Fantasy sports has allowed for all of those same actions to occur. For those that play, there is a joy in winning and getting those bragging rights, but it also gives us that connection with our friends, family, and our colleagues. That is the most priceless part of the process. So again, I welcome you on this adventure with me and hope that the information I speak about will allow me to connect with you all and become a part of your fantasy process moving forward. As I stated, this first episode will focus on quarterback grouping, their ADP, and their ranking. Betting on who will finish higher than their projected draft position is what can be the factor to winning your season, instead of those who are overprojected and will bring you down like an anchor. In this episode, we will look at the quarterback rankings to determine who are the best and worst buys at their draft position. We will group quarterbacks, and from there I will tell you who I would rather have on my team. When grouping the quarterbacks, there's no better place to start than the fantasy stars. Josh Allen was last year's number one finisher, and while he had some very off games from a passing perspective, his legs made up for it with his running game. Grabbing Allen as your quarterback one will give you a top-tier quarterback, but he's really worth it that early. Allen will still have his legs to run with this season, so he still has a high floor, but to me his ceiling has dropped. He lost his top two wideouts in Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, and while they still have Kincaid at tight end, Cook at running back, and the rookie Keon Coleman out of Florida State, there's no one else notable besides maybe Curtis Samuel. I don't see this group making up for the 152 receptions that those wideouts had last year. Taking Allen will give you a certifiable QB1, but this year that is too rich for my blood if he goes as early as expected with the question marks at wide receiver now. If for some reason he falls, jump. But as of right now, he's projected to be the first quarterback to go off the board, at 19 on Sleeper and 29th on ESPN, being the overall QB1 on both platforms. Due to the loss of Diggs and Davis and the unknown at the position this season, I have him at QB2, swapping places with Eagles' Jalen Hurts. Speaking of Hurts, Jalen Hurts has the returning pieces to start strong and lead your team into the fantasy playoffs this season. With one, if not the best offensive line in football, minus the now retired Jason Kelce, the Eagles should have another strong run game for Hurts, and the 6-point tush-push, brotherly shove, or whatever you want to call it, is always a go. There is the expectation that Saquon Barkley there now will vulture some of those touchdowns, but I wouldn't think that the Eagles would go away from what works for them, and only them. Hurts is a great pick at his current ADP and Sleeper, and just as good of a pick as Allen on ESPN. Hurts is projected to finish second this year and has an ADP of 31 on Sleeper and is 30th on ESPN. While Allen has a slightly higher floor than Hurts, this year Hurts' ceiling is a lot higher in my book, so I'm having him as my QB1 due largely to the fact that Saquon is great in the receiving game and giving Hurts another weapon in his arsenal. Now moving on to our third quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. The three-time Super Bowl champion, face of the league, is one of the biggest stars in the world. What else could you want from your quarterback? That right there is enough for some to draft him, and personally as a Los Angeles Chargers fan, I consistently see and feel the dread he gives me at the end of games. They play the Chiefs close, and he always finds a way. I can't seem to hate the guy, though, the way I have hated Brady in the past. As far as fantasy goes, last year Mahomes had an off year, and that off year still resulted in an 8th place fantasy finish. Besides Kelce and the emergence of Rashee Rice later in the season, he might as well have been throwing passes to John Cena, because no one was there. Not to mention the amount of times plays were called back to Kadarius Toney's cluelessness. With all of this, he metaphorically and physically scrambled his way into 8th place. And now taking a play from the Dolphins playbook, the Chiefs are loaded up on speedy receivers. Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy should allow for the field to be stretched a lot more, which should in turn allow Rice and Kelce to be opened a lot more too. Look for Mahomes to bounce back in a big way and be a perfect pick at 35 on Sleeper and 45 on ESPN if he somehow lasts that long. He's a third-ranked quarterback on Sleeper, which is where I have him, and 4th on ESPN, right after Allen, Hurts, and Jackson. Moving on to the next quarterback, Lamar Jackson. Can he follow up his MVP season with a fantasy MVP for you? Projected to go around Mahomes at 37 on Sleeper and a pick earlier at 44 on ESPN. Jackson will always have a high floor with his running abilities, even if his passing game is not up to the quality of other top-tier quarterbacks. In his first year with offensive coordinator Todd Monken, Jackson had more pass attempts than any other year in his career. Along with this, he had help from rookie standout Zay Flowers, now going into year 2, and still has tight end Mark Andrews on the team. The question on Jackson is if he can stay healthy. When healthy, he's a top 5 quarterback. That's it. When? When can he stay healthy? Missing large amount of games 2 of the last 3 years does not give ease when drafting him. But with the new addition of King Henry to the backfield, there should be some load taken off Lamar this season. Drafting him at his ADP is good, but with the injury history, it is hard to do that with confidence. If he drops, snag him immediately due to his enormous upside. Due to this, he is the 4th-ranked quarterback on Sleeper and in my rankings, and is 3rd on ESPN. The next group of quarterbacks I have is the something is holding them backs. The first quarterback on this list is Joe Burrow. The talent and swag that Burrow exudes is undeniable. When healthy, he is a top 5 quarterback in this league and in fantasy, but the problem is his health. With 2 season-ending injuries in his young career and an offensive line that cannot seem to help him regardless of personnel changes, it makes it hard to draft the former number 1 overall pick. He has 2 superstar wideouts in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins that should also help his floor. His current ADP in both Sleeper and ESPN is 63, going in the mid-rounds, which means that you do not have to risk one of your early picks on him. He's the QB7 on Sleeper and QB5 on ESPN and in my rankings. If you're going to pick him up, make sure to pick up a suitable backup for your team as injuries last year to quarterbacks across the league made pickups scarce, and he's known to be injured. Also keep an eye on his backup. The next quarterback on this list is Kyler Murray. Murray is coming into the season almost 2 years removed from his torn ACL on Monday Night Football. All accounts say he's a healthy and 100% ready to go. And because of this, I think the injury is behind him this season. And along with that, he says Call of Duty is behind him as well. With all those jokes aside, the emergence of Trey McBride at tight end and the arrival of Marvin Harrison Jr. means there's a lot to be happy if you're Kyler, and if you are a Kyler owner in fantasy. The Cardinals' defense was pretty non-existent last year too, which means that if this happens, again, the offense will have to do a lot more in games. He's another player that can spread the ball out and scramble when needed, giving Murray a safe floor, but a lower ceiling than some of the other quarterbacks due to team personnel and his coaching. His current ADP is 73 on Sleeper and 78th on ESPN. His QB9 on Sleeper and 10 on ESPN, but personally I'm a little higher on him this year and I have him at QB7. The next quarterback in the something is holding them back group is Dak Prescott. And one could joke what's holding Dak Prescott and the Cowboys back is the inability to win a playoff game come January. Or simply put, Jerry Jones. But Dak Prescott is a better quarterback than given credit for. Being on the Cowboys gives a lot of baggage to anyone that can't bring America's team back to the promised land. And while the Cowboys will somehow end up choking in the playoffs, you don't have to worry about that with Dak throughout the fantasy season into the fantasy playoffs. He has consistently produced with a high floor and low ceiling, with some outliers here and there. His connection with CeeDee Lamb is what really helps him stand apart from others. No other teams besides the Bengals with the Burrow-Chase connection and the Dolphins with the Tua-Tyreek connection can produce what this combo can. In his first season with head coach Mike McCarthy calling the plays, he finished as QB3 on the season. I would not be surprised one bit if he lands in the area again. Drafting him at his ADP of 74 in Sleeper and 64 on ESPN should be easy. Plus, the Cowboys game is always on, so you don't have to worry about missing your quarterback play. I could see some reaching around earlier for him based on last year's finish, and that's okay. But I would not do more than that. And if he falls past his ADP, all the more reason to get him. Sleeper has him at 9, and ESPN and my personal rankings have him as QB8. The next quarterback is Justin Herbert. And being a Chargers fan, I can tell you what's holding Justin Herbert back. Having 3 head coaches in his 5 years and a new offensive coordinator every year doesn't help anyone. A few seasons ago, Herbert was a top 5 quarterback pick in fantasy. And now coming back from a season-ending injury to his throwing hand last season into a new system that'll be led by an offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, formerly of the Ravens. And in his first, run second, run always approach, Herbert has slipped outside of the top 10 for the first time since his rookie season. Some would say that there could be some bias due to me being a Chargers fan, but there really is no doubt in my mind that he could finish better than his ADP even if the run game is the focus. That is not to say that he will be in the top 5, as we have to look at the things realistically. Going into the season, he doesn't just have a new head coach in John Harbaugh and his new OC in Roman. He also has new teammates at every skill position. Chargers overhauled their entire team. It is going to take time for Herbert to get into sync with those guys, so be patient. Look for Ladd McConkey and Josh Palmer to be the main focus of the passing game. Herbert's current ADP is 118 on Sleeper and 110th on ESPN. He's the QB16 on Sleeper, QB13 on ESPN, and is number 12 in my rankings. After Herbert is Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence has had a weird career to date. Another one of those number one overall picks that was expected to turn around the organization on his own. His rookie year was kind of a wash due to Urban Meyer and his antics. Since then, he's flourished to an extent under Doug Peterson, which has translated to success in the NFL. Not so much for fantasy purposes, though. He's consistently been middle of the pack and a low-end QB1 at all times. He has those boom games, but also has those bust games. I'd be more inclined to draft the Jaguars' skill positions, as Lawrence has really helped them succeed, than him himself. With Calvin Ridley out, they've drafted Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU and brought in Gabe Davis from Buffalo to go alongside Christian Kirk. This trio doesn't scream star power to me, and that will ultimately bring down some of Lawrence's upside. But it is nowhere near the worst wideout group either. His college teammate Travis Etienne should again be drafted early due to the long-standing connection between the quarterback and running back. He is one of those quarterbacks where I think those around him will benefit more from him than he will from them. It just is what it is. His ADP is 128 on Sleeper and 136 on ESPN. As for QB rankings, he's 17 on Sleeper, 18 on ESPN, and I have him at number 21. Another guy that seems to help those around him more than himself is Tua Tagovailoa. Tua has all the weapons a guy could want or need. All of the Dolphins skill players are legitimate threats in the open field with their speed and elusiveness. One of the best duos in the NFL is the Cheetah Tyreek Hill and his opposite, the Penguin Jalen Waddle. These guys create space all on their own. The running backs aren't half bad either, with Raheem Mostert taking the fantasy league by storm last year with touchdown after touchdown after touchdown, and the emergence of Devon Achane, who is like a create-your-own Madden player when healthy. The Dolphins were crazy on offense. Well, the one piece that could not keep up with was their quarterback, throwing costly interceptions and looking like a deer in the headlights at times. But I guess that's normal when you're scared to get hit again. He's one concussion away from retirement. That's the running joke with Tua, and you have to feel for the guy. But it doesn't mean you should draft him as your QB1, as there's no excuse not to be a top 5 quarterback with that roster. Tua's current ADP is 105 on Sleeper and 161st on ESPN. I'd personally lean more towards ESPN on this one, though. I have him in my late 130s, and as for rankings, he is 13 on Sleeper, 19 on ESPN, and 20 on mine. If you wait for a quarterback, he would be an okay 1A, 1B combo on drafting and could definitely be your backup. But I'm just not sold on making him a start him and leave him in fantasy until he can prove it. Now moving on to the next group. This group's called the guys that don't get enough love. And all pun intended, we're going to start the group with Jordan Love. Not knowing what to expect last year with Love had him being drafted towards the end of fantasy drafts, and that's just not the case this year with a top 5 finish at the position last year. And the Packers felt strong enough about this showing that he is now the highest paid quarterback in NFL history. And while I still think that's absurd, he had his up games and his down games, and there was enough to get a true feeling for how he was and how he'll do this year. You'll have your up games and your down games again, and you'll get about 17 to 23 fantasy points per game on an average week. The talent surrounding him is young and still pretty inexperienced for the most part, due to his numerous injuries in his career, and the Packers have no big-name players besides the acquisition of Josh Jacobs during free agency. He has the ability and talent to finish as a top 10 again, but if the rest of the quarterbacks mentioned before can stay healthy this year, I don't see him breaking the top 5 again. Jordan Love's current ADP is 85 in Sleeper, 79th in ESPN, and going near Brock Purdy, who I feel a lot more confident about drafting due to the higher floor he carries with the 49ers' talented roster. He's ranked as 10th on Sleeper, 9th on ESPN, and is 11th in my rankings. And talking about Brock Purdy, the 49ers have one of the best skill groups in the NFL, with the best running back in McCaffrey, a top 5 tight end in Kittle, and 2-star receivers in Debo and Ayuk. Now, Ayuk does have some concerns surrounding him, so there is that. But that shouldn't stop you from drafting Brock Purdy this year. Shanahan will always find a way for his offense to produce, with or without Ayuk. It is what it is. Many have called Purdy a game manager, but with the team he's surrounding him, being a game manager isn't really that bad, is it? Not for fantasy purposes, at least. Draft him with confidence over others in the same area. Purdy comes in with an ADP of 102 on Sleeper and is 80th on ESPN. He's as good as a pick at 80, and even better if you can get him at 102. As for rankings, he's 12th on Sleeper, 11th on ESPN, and he's number 10 in my fantasy rankings. Now moving on to this next group, I really couldn't decide on one name to call him. So I have 2 names. The with age comes injuries, or the former NFC North quarterbacks with an injury history. Starting out this group is none other than the man who led this division for years and years, the face of the NFC North for the last 15 years, Aaron Rodgers. Not much needs to be said about Rodgers and the talent and skill he has brought to the table for all those years in Green Bay. But that's just it. That is all we've seen. Tearing his Achilles 30 seconds into the season screwed the Jets' chances to do much of anything last year, and made it hard for those that invested in him after watching Hard Knocks last year to feel good about their team moving forward. Nobody wants to become a scavenger to get themselves to the promised land of the fantasy season. And though he's a year removed from his tear, he still gives me the ick. Seeing him go down that quickly with a new team, I just can't get the image out of my head watching him run out with the American flag on 9/11 and the crowd going wild on a day held with so much importance in New York, just to see him go down not even more than 15 minutes later with a crowd just as quiet as they were during the moment of silence. For me, I will be staying away from Rodgers. But for those that want to roll the dice on him, he does have one of the best young wide receivers in Garrett Wilson, one of the best all-around running backs in Breece Hall, and the incoming Mike Williams from the Chargers that has shown that even though he is injury-prone as well, that he can produce when on the field. Currently, Rodgers' ADP is 139 on Sleeper, 81st on ESPN, and I'd be leaning more towards him at the sleeper position than anywhere near ESPN has him ranked, due to his injury and playing on that cursed MetLife field. He's ranked at 20 on Sleeper, 12th on ESPN, and he's the 18th quarterback in my rankings. Another former NFC North quarterback coming off a torn Achilles is Kirk Cousins. Tearing his Achilles halfway through the season last year ended his tenure as a Vikings quarterback as he left for the Atlanta Falcons in a fishy first day of free agency that screams the word tampering. That is neither here nor there, as the bigger story was pick number 8 on draft day, Michael Penix Jr. Cousins has been able to produce for multiple teams for multiple years, having his greatest fantasy seasons coming since Justin Jefferson has been drafted. Before he got hurt last year, he was a top 5 fantasy quarterback, and that was without Jefferson for quite a bit of it. Moving away should not have changed that, as weather-wise, he'll still play in North Stadium a majority of the time, and trading Jefferson and Hawkinson for Drake London and Kyle Pitts is a downgrade, but the dual threat ability of Bijan Robinson should alleviate all that. Player personnel should be no issue. The real issue lies with the rehab preparations for the upcoming season, and if he doesn't start hot, will fans call for Penix's name instead? Who knows? Currently, Cousins' ADP is 134 on Sleeper, 112th on ESPN, and I'm okay drafting him at either of these ADPs due to the talent of the Atlanta Falcons roster. His current rank is 18 on Sleeper, 15 on ESPN, and is 13 on my personal rankings. Last former NFC North quarterback in this group is Matthew Stafford. Once the face of the Lions, now living it up in LA, where his wife does more speaking for him than he does for himself. While not coming off a season-ending injury like the other two, he did have one just 2 years ago and has had quite a few injuries during his short time with the Rams. Just as the other two have, Stafford has some great skill players to help him, with Triple Crown winner Cooper Kupp and the emergence of Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams. But two of these three guys had injuries of their own last year. Only Nacua being able to play through his injury last season made it hard for Stafford to produce, and because of this, I see him finishing towards the middle of the pack and after quarterbacks that can be taken later on in the draft. His current ADP is 136 on Sleeper, 162nd on ESPN, and Stafford is ranked as QB 19 on Sleeper, 20 on ESPN, and is 22 in my own rankings. Staying healthy will always be a key for these guys, and that is why I'm out on all of them as my fantasy starter this year. But I would not mind having them as a backup, or maybe even a starter over one of the rookies early on if I had to go that route. The one I feel most confident about, though, is Kirk Cousins, because if he is indeed 100%, he will go off due to the players around him in Atlanta. Now moving on to the next group. I have this group called the second or even third chances do happen. I decided to start this group off with Jared Goff, because he's the only one in the group that made an immediate impact on his new team. Everyone thought the Rams won the trade when Stafford went to LA and Goff came to the Motor City. Taking in Goff's large contract and what he showed the prior season did not give much faith to the Lions faithful. But what we didn't know then is that Motor City Dan Campbell would change the culture of the Lions and inspire the people of Detroit to once again show pride in the Lions' pride. With this change came offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, who has made the offense one of the highest scoring and most efficient offenses in the NFL the last 2 seasons. This continues to bode well for Goff, who has all the pieces around him to take the Lions back to the playoffs for a consecutive year for the first time since the 1995 NFL season. 30 years. Crazy, but they can do it. With the sun god Amon-Ra St. Brown and the best new tight end on the block in Sam Laporta, not to mention the dynamic duo of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs at running back, Goff has everything he needs to succeed. He finished last season with an average of 18 points per game, and he finished as the QB7, and there isn't any reason to believe he can't do it again. Goff is that boring pick. He's the safe pick. He has a high floor and a low ceiling, and he's as vanilla as a pick as it gets at the position. With a current ADP of 112 on Sleeper and 197th on ESPN, he can bring stable points to a team that waits on the quarterback position till later in the draft. He's ranked as QB 14 on Sleeper, 21 on ESPN, and is at 15 in my personal rankings. Now the next quarterback is Derek Carr. Carr showed nothing that inspired trust in him at quarterback last year, making costly decisions and interceptions that ended up deciding games. Yet as a fantasy quarterback, he was middle of the pack when playing. In the 14 games he was available, for a majority of the game, he averaged 16 points. Now, he was nursing a shoulder injury and a rib injury for most of the season, so I'll give him some leeway. And the shoulder injury did make it hard for him to air the ball out to Chris Olave, and is what made Alvin Kamara a PPR machine last year, with all the dink and dunk 3-yard passes. Towards the end of the year, Carr's season turned around, and he looked back to his normal self, with an average of 20 points per game. If he can stay healthy and make better decisions this year, he may be a steal at his current ADP of 203 on Sleeper and 270 on ESPN. If he can't, then rookie Spencer Rattler may be the starter next season. He's a great pickup for a backup quarterback and is ranked as QB 29 on Sleeper and ESPN and is 23rd on my board. Now moving on, we got Deshaun Watson. Gone are the days where everyone had faith in Watson, and I'm not talking about his morals either. There's been nothing that has shown us that he is the same quarterback that led the Texans to the playoffs on multiple occasions, a shell of his former self at the position. But luckily for him, not all of his talent is gone. Watson can still run and scramble and still makes passes that give us a glimpse of what he used to be. This has given him a pretty solid floor and allowed him to average 18 points per game. The only problem with all this is he averaged that over a span of 5 games, as that was all he was able to play last season. A shoulder injury took him out and brought in a motley crew of guys until the Browns finally signed Joe Flacco late in the season. It's hard to trust a guy that is rarely available. But on the plus side, if he is healthy, we at least know he's going to play after the Browns gave him all that money, guaranteed. Watson's current ADP is 159 on Sleeper, 135th on ESPN, and he's ranked as 22 on Sleeper, 17 on ESPN, and 17th in my own rankings. Moving on, we got Baker Mayfield. I'm going to start by saying there must have been something in the Bay down in Tampa last year, or Brady gave him a few pointers, because Baker Mayfield looked the best he had in his entire career. A journeyman since his time with the Browns, the former first overall pick showed the talent that made the Browns take a chance on him just 6 years ago. Swagger, Riz, whatever you want to call it, Baker showed it, and he showed that he's got it last year, helping the Buccaneers take the NFC South and knock off the defending NFC champion Eagles. His connection with Mike Evans boosted both of their fantasy projections throughout the season, allowing them both to finish well above their ADP last season. Besides Evan, Baker has Chris Godwin, Trey Palmer at wide receiver, and Rachaad White, who has made a name for himself as a receiving back. And Baker finished the season as the QB 10, and I believe he could finish relatively the same this year, which means he's a great buy at his current ADP of 153 on Sleeper and 200 on ESPN. Sleeper has him around Stafford, Rodgers, and Watson, all of which had serious injuries last season or 2 seasons ago, and ESPN has him next to Daniel Jones, who's in the same boat as those guys. Baker's the safe option here, as why not take the guy that's been available? Availability is the best ability after all. He's ranked as QB 21 on Sleeper, 24 on ESPN, and is number 19 in my personal rankings. The next guy on the list is Geno Smith, and Smith looked like a brand new man since becoming the starter of the Seahawks 2 seasons ago. A man that had been a career backup for a majority of his 11-year career, had shown that just because he couldn't turn around the Jets, that he could lead another one. And let's be honest, as we've learned, that's a tall task for any man. His first season as the Seahawks starter was definitely better than last. With questionable passes and sacks that could have been avoided, Geno looked lost at times last season. And as of right now, Geno is still the leader of the offense, and new head coach Mike Macdonald and new OC Ryan Grubb have already stated that Smith will have more responsibility this season. With a talented slew of skill players in DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Noah Fant, Kenneth Walker III, and Zach Charbonnet, the Seahawks have a chance to make it back to the playoffs just as they did in their first season post-Russell Wilson era. Geno Smith's current ADP is 178 in Sleeper, 218 on ESPN, allowing for you to draft him late as a backup quarterback in larger leagues or pick him as a streamer in smaller leagues as needed. He's ranked as QB 25 on Sleeper and on ESPN, and he's 24th on my own. The next group of quarterbacks that are in this list are Gardner Minshew, Jacoby Brissett, Sam Darnold, Russell Wilson, and Justin Fields. But I'll be talking about them later during the quarterback battles segment. The next group that I'm going to talk about is the sophomore years. I'll start by talking about CJ Stroud. And it's hard to say a top 2 draft pick is surprising, but what Stroud did in year 1 was nothing but surprising. A Texans team that was expected to finish at the bottom of their division ended up being the best team in the AFC South due to the emergence of the best pocket passer of the 2023 season. In an era of the mobile quarterback, Stroud showed a flashback to just a few years ago when pocket passing was all the rage. Stroud finished his rookie season QB 11 in fantasy, and while he did have a few down games, a majority were good or even great. Stroud is slated to be an early to mid-round pick off the board with an ADP of 44 in Sleeper and 62 on ESPN. With all the returning pieces and the trades for Joe Mixon and Stephon Diggs, Stroud should and could outperform his ADP, especially if he can show off some of the runs that made teams look at him while he was at Ohio State. Does he have the ability to finish as the top 5 quarterback? Oh, Definitely, for sure. And only time will tell. He's ranked as the QB5 on Sleeper and as QB6 on ESPN and in my personal rankings. The next quarterback up is Anthony Richardson. And Richardson's a hard pick to make at his current ADP for me. Going as the 5th or 6th quarterback off the board for a guy that played a total of 4 games his rookie season does not sit well with me. His ADP has him at 54 on Sleeper and 61st on ESPN, just ahead of Stroud. We all know the prospect he is. He's a work in progress, but he's the new prototype quarterback of the NFL. A cannon for an arm, and he has legs to run for days. Basically, Josh Allen. The only difference is Allen hasn't missed the time Richardson has in his entire career. Richardson is the first quarterback that I would for sure take a pass on, and it is completely due to how early he is projected with nothing to back up why he should be drafted that early. He has too many questions for me with his small sample size, and I get that he has the potential, and that is why he is so high, but it's just not for me. If you can get him later on, go for it. But there's no way I would draft him as my QB1 at his current ADP. He's ranked as QB6 on Sleeper, 5 on ESPN, and then he's a lot later at number 9 in my personal rankings. And our next quarterback up is last year's first overall pick, Bryce Young. There's not much for me to say that's in favor of drafting Bryce Young after what we saw last year. The offense was absolutely unwatchable besides the aging Adam Thielen, and most of this was due to the play calling by the now fired head coach Frank Reich. Due to this, I will give Young the benefit of the doubt and count last season as a wash. He does have a new head coach in Dave Canales, who was able to resurrect Baker Mayfield's career from quarterback obscurity last year. Along with this, the Panthers have a new wide receiver 1 in Deontay Johnson from the Steelers, who never gets enough love for his game just because he doesn't get a lot of touchdowns. They also drafted Xavier Legette this season. The new trio of Thielen, Johnson, and Legette should help him have a better season if his O-line can hold off the defenses just a little longer. There is room for a lot of growth this year. Let's just hope last year was a fluke. Young's current ADP is 192 on Sleeper, 198th on ESPN. It's not a bad price if you're high on Young this year, but I'm not, so I'm out. He's ranked as QB 27 on Sleeper, 22 on ESPN, is number 28 in my rankings. Moving on, we have Will Levis. Coming into his first full season as starter, Will Levis has to deal with the new philosophy of the Titans. Out with the old and in with the new. Just in their case, all the new players are all old. Gone are the days of letting Derrick Henry do all the work. In comes Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, and Tyler Boyd alongside DeAndre Hopkins. Due to this, Levis should have more appeal in a fantasy perspective, as he will be the focal point of the offense now and leading the new system of veterans. This offensive line is supposed to be revamped as well, which should give Levis more time to process instead of being pressured. Will Levis's current ADP is 173 on Sleeper, 219 on ESPN. Levis to me is a great option if you want to wait towards the later rounds to get your backup quarterback. He's ranked as the QB 24 on Sleeper and is 26th on ESPN and in my personal rankings. The last quarterback in this group is Aiden O'Connell, but I'll talk more about him and his quarterback battle with Gardner Minshew later. Moving on, the next group is the rookies. I'm going to start with Caleb Williams, the first overall pick from this year. Caleb Williams has had a lot of excitement around his name ever since he took over for Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma. Since then, he's won a Heisman at USC and has been called a potential Hall of Famer before ever even getting a snap in the NFL. Now, we got to slow our brakes here, people. The transition isn't that easy. Just ask the Panthers and Bryce Young. And talking about the Panthers, a little side note on all that, I think we can all agree that the Panthers got finessed by the Bears. I do believe Williams will have a better season than Young did last year, and that is due to the amount of talent the Bears have acquired over the last 2 years. After getting a new wideout last year in DJ Moore, the Bears then got all-pro wide receiver Keenan Allen from the Chargers as their new wide receiver 2, and got Rome Odunze in the draft as their wide receiver 3. That's about as stacked as a room as it gets for a rookie to have access to, not to mention the number 1 overall pick. Moore, Allen, and Odunze can all stretch the field if need be, or even break ankles in their route running ability. Picking up D Swift in free agency should help too. Right now, Williams' ADP is 95 on Sleeper, just ahead of Brock Purdy, and 113 on ESPN, one after Kirk Cousins. If it was me, I would switch those. I would have Williams after Purdy and before Cousins. He's ranked as the QB 11 on Sleeper, 16 on ESPN, and is number 14 in my own rankings. The next quarterback is this year's number 2 overall pick, Jayden Daniels. Another Heisman-winning quarterback, Jayden Daniels brings mobility to the Commanders that they haven't seen since RG3 and the Redskins. A combination of elusiveness and speed makes Daniels a great dual-threat quarterback, which is good if he's going to be running for his life, just like Sam Howell had to do last year. Daniels does have the arm to spread the field and has 2 amazing underrated receivers in Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. Along with this, having the backfield 1-2 punch of Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler should help take some pressure off the rookie quarterback. Daniels' ADP is 113 on Sleeper and 111th on ESPN, right around Justin Herbert. I would lean more towards Herbert due to his history, but if you want to take the chance on Jayden Daniels, go ahead. He has the support to finish as a top 12 quarterback in my book, but only time will tell if he can translate what he did at LSU to the NFL. He's ranked as the QB 15 on Sleeper, 14 on ESPN, and is number 16 in my own rankings. For now, I'll be skipping over JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix due to their quarterback battles. The next quarterback up is the backup, Michael Penix Jr. Definitely the wildest pick of the draft, which earned the Falcons an F on their post-draft grade. This is not because Penix is a bad pick, because he's not. He's just not. He was a large part of what got Washington into the national championship game. What made it a bad pick was that they had just signed Kirk Cousins to a large contract just a month earlier. But coming off an Achilles injury is never certain that he'll be 100% or that he won't get hurt again at the age he is. So if the time comes where Penix hears his name called, I'd have full faith in him with the talent he has around him and the talent he has himself. Normally, I wouldn't say to handcuff your quarterback, but if last season taught us anything, it's that you always got to prepare for the worst. And if we just got to hope last season was the worst, and that quarterbacks can stay healthy this season. Always good to have an insurance plan, and with the ADP in both Sleeper and ESPN, you can get him with one of the last, if not your last pick, to go along with Kirko Chains. He's ranked as a QB 34 on Sleeper, 37 on ESPN, and is number 38 in my own rankings. The next quarterback on this list is Spencer Rattler. There's been a lot of hype around Rattler this summer. His draft stock plummeted due to his documentary he started in high school called QB1 and losing the starting job to Caleb Williams at OU. Both of these are arguable based on where he is now. Someone can change a lot in 5 years or even in 2 college seasons, and apparently that's just what Rattler did. At South Carolina, he was said to have matured a lot and became a humbling leader due to his fall of grace at Oklahoma. The Saints have said he's shown a commanding presence this summer and has displayed some flashes of brilliance, something they were hoping for when they took a chance on him. Derek Carr is the starter in New Orleans, and that's not going to change right now. But if he gets banged up like he did last season or keeps throwing costly interceptions, it may just be enough wiggle room for Rattler to take over. With a very underrated skill personnel, the Saints have a chance to take the NFC South as a dark horse if they can pull it together on offense, and that all starts at quarterback. Only time will tell if Carr's at the helm by the season's end, or it's Rattler. And I can't say I have an idea who it'll be. Rattler is not worth a draft spot on your board, but he is someone I'd add to your watch list. So please add him there. His current ADP on Sleeper is 978, and he isn't even ranked on ESPN. That should just tell you enough. He's not ranked on either platform, and I have him as ranked as my QB 44. I have him as a potential deep sleeper just in case something happens to Carr like it did last year. This next group is called the Enigma. The definition of enigma is someone or something that is mysterious or puzzling, and that's just who Daniel Jones is. If this group doesn't represent Jones in fantasy and in real life, then I don't know what does. Daniel Jones is probably one of the only quarterbacks that you can both feel comfortable about streaming on a given week and feel comfortable about going against. He's as average as it gets in fantasy, having both high weeks and low weeks. He's the modern-day fantasy Andy Dalton, but slightly worse. Coming off an ACL tear does make it hard to draft him, and the loss of Saquon doesn't help either. With not much help on the team and the only wide receiver that can produce and stay healthy in Darius Slayton, he's better off left undrafted in fantasy this year. But that's not to say that he isn't a good pickup on a bye week or if you have a quarterback go down. Overall, not a bad quarterback, but not good either. Daniel Jones' current ADP is 233 on Sleeper and 218th on ESPN. Around this time, I would feel a lot more comfortable about drafting a guy like Baker, Geno, or waiting on Gardner Minshew. He's ranked as the QB 28 on Sleeper, 23 on ESPN, and is slightly lower at 31 in my personal rankings. The next group is called the backups, or what I'm going to personally call the other guys. They aren't the flashy rookie or the incumbent starter, but these veterans, when given the chance, get the job done just like Marky Mark and Will Ferrell did in the other guys. In other words, they're a peacock, and you just got to let them fly. To start out, we'll start out with Joe Flacco. Coming out of an unofficial retirement to light the NFL on fire towards the tail end of the season, he led the Browns to the playoffs and became the NFL's comeback player of the year, upsetting many people's preseason bets of Damar Hamlin winning the prize. He played 6 games, including the playoff game against Houston, and averaged 20 points per game. Not bad for a guy straight off the couch. The Colts saw enough value in the 39-year-old to pay him $4.5 million this season to be the insurance policy to Anthony Richardson in case he gets hurt again. That enough should warrant looks if you plan on drafting Richardson. Keep an eye on Flacco, and if the time comes, do not hesitate to pick him up when Richardson goes down if that occurs. The next quarterback in this group is Sam Howell, and I cannot honestly say if Sam Howell was given a real chance with the Commanders last season. Allowing a league-high 65 sacks in 2023, the Washington O-line could not stop anybody. Costly interceptions were a part of Howell's game last season, and while there were some throws that should have just been thrown away, the guy was running for his life on every play. I thought overall Howell showed enough that I think he could be a starter on a team that could protect him, and being behind Geno Smith for a while should help him learn and gain more experience so that he does not make some of the bonehead mistakes he made last year in his first season as a starter. If for some reason Smith were to go down, Howell can take over and produce fantasy numbers for you just as he did last season with his arms and his legs and all the talent surrounding that team. Another quarterback to keep an eye on is Tyrod Taylor. Taylor has shown that if given the chance that he can keep a team in the game. And as a backup, that's what's expected of you when given the chance. After being given the chance last season with Daniel Jones' midseason injury and then his season-ending ACL tear, Tyrod ended up averaging 18 points in 4 games he started on the team. That only had Darius Slayton and Saquon at running back. I would say there's plenty of a good chance that if Rodgers goes down for the Jets this year, that Tyrod could score 18 points per game, if not more, with the talented roster the Jets have to offer. The last quarterback in this group is Jake Browning. Jake Browning is a name that not many people knew until last season. The former Washington Husky made a name for himself in college, but became a career backup in the pros, never being given a chance until Joe Burrow went down with a torn ligament in his wrist last season. Browning showed up for the Bengals, and this led to fantasy points for those that decided to take a flyer on him. In the 7 games as a starter, he averaged 20 points per game, and with the talented roster the Bengals have, it is no wonder that he was able to come right in and produce without any hitch. If Burrow goes down again this season or even misses a game, you need a streamer. Browning can do that, and he has shown he will produce. Now I'm going to start diving deep into the quarterback battles. First, I'll start with the Patriots, Drake Maye and Jacoby Brissett. Maye and Brissett are both on a team that lost their identity over the last 2 seasons. Tom Brady was the first dominant to go, and now Bill Belichick. Gone are all the pieces that made the Patriots feared over all those years. With new head coach Tyrod Taylor taking over the team, it'll most likely still have a solid defense again this year, a staple in their recent history. The offense is another thing, though, with no real threats to opposing teams and no noteworthy skill players on their team. Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas aren't going to be players that would be a starting duo on most NFL teams, but here we are. As of right now, Maye isn't the starting quarterback, as all signs have pointed to Brissett to start the season. The guy being drafted 3rd overall this year will be keeping the bench warm for at least a little while. He may be worth taking a flyer late in drafts, but if you do draft him, make sure to pick up Jacoby Brissett as well. Personally, I'm not high on either of these quarterbacks because there isn't enough viable pieces for me to see them producing roster-worthy points. But maybe that's just me going off of Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi from last season. And the Pats do have a new OC from Cleveland, so there is that. Maye's current ADP is 215 on Sleeper and is 199th on ESPN, while Jacoby Brissett's current ADP is 336th on Sleeper and 310th on ESPN. Maye is ranked as the QB 26 on Sleeper, 29 on ESPN, and is 32nd in mine, while Brissett is ranked as QB 37 on Sleeper, 35 on ESPN, and is 33 on mine. In my personal rankings, they are 1 apart. The next quarterback duo I'm going to look at is the Vikings, Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy. There's no discussion that the Vikings have a talented offense. The weakest part of their offense last season was the run game, and with Alexander Mattison being replaced with Aaron Jones, the offense should be a lot more balanced this year. As for which quarterback will be leaving Minnesota, it's looking like Sam Darnold's going to be leading the position at this moment, as all news offseason has pointed to Darnold being the week 1 starter. In his career, Darnold has had his ups and downs, but no team has been as talented as the one who'll lead this season, except the 49ers last year, but he was a backup, and so I'm not really counting that. As for J.J. McCarthy, he led the Michigan Wolverines to the national championship alongside head coach Jim Harbaugh and brought the trophy back to Ann Arbor. He played like the underdog all last year, even though they were favored in every game. He's got that chip on his shoulder, and he'll use Darnold starting over him as fuel. I believe that Darnold will start the season, and I believe he'll play a good amount of games. But by mid-season, if the Vikings are not in contention, then McCarthy will be starting at quarterback moving forward. Really, if not earlier. We've done this song and dance with Darnold way too many times to know how it goes. As of right now, Darnold's ADP is 291st on Sleeper and 302nd on ESPN, while McCarthy's ADP is 168 on Sleeper and 267th on ESPN. Darnold is ranked as the QB 35 on Sleeper, 34 on ESPN, and he's number 36 in my rankings. And McCarthy is ranked as the quarterback 23 on Sleeper, 28th on ESPN, and number 29th in my rankings. If McCarthy was somehow the week 1 starter, he would definitely move up, as I think he has the talent, and with that offense, he would be moving up quite a bit in the rankings. But as of right now, I'm going to keep him where I have him. The last few quarterback battles are going to be a little more intense, as of right now, the head coaches have not decided who they're going to be going with. It has been stated that Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce is in no hurry to name a starter. So with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, we're still not sure what's happening. If this is true, though, why pay Minshew $25 million over this season and next? They saw what he did for Indianapolis, and they jumped at the chance to sign him. Yet Pierce is still wanting to make this a competition. It just doesn't quite make a lot of sense to me. Aiden O'Connell showed flashes of what he could be last season, but he's still rough around the edges and did not look like a commanding type out on the field. Minshew, on the other hand, had an instant connection with his number 1 wideout, Michael Pittman, last season that propelled Pittman into a top 15 at the wide receiver position. If Devontae Adams has any pull in this decision-making progress, I bet he'd want Gardner Minshew as well, as after O'Connell took over last year, Adams started getting less volume and Jacoby Myers became the beneficiary of those targets. If I were to choose one of these guys to roster, I would without a doubt choose Gardner and see Minshew mania unfold in the Sin City. Minshew's current ADP is 253 on Sleeper, 296th on ESPN, while O'Connell's ADP is 301 on Sleeper and on ESPN. Minshew is ranked as QB 33 on Sleeper, 32nd on ESPN, and he's a little higher in my rankings at 27. While O'Connell is ranked at QB 36 on Sleeper, 33 on ESPN, and 35 in my personal rankings. The next quarterback battle is what I consider the most intriguing battle of the offseason, which goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, as Russell Wilson and Justin Fields both have had something to prove this season. After being released by the Broncos after an underwhelming season under Sean Payton, Russell Wilson signed with the Steelers in hopes to get a fresh start leading the black and gold. Along the way, Fields was traded by the Bears at no risk to the Steelers. This has brought on more confusion as both quarterbacks have something to offer. Russell is a veteran with a resume to back it up. 9 Pro Bowls, 2 Super Bowl appearances, and an Lombardi under his belt. The bad part of all of this is that it has been a few years since we've seen that Russell. Justin Fields, on the other hand, is a former first-rounder that has tons more upside with his athleticism and has more to offer to the team than Wilson does at this point in his career. But as of right now, Mike Tomlin has Wilson as the QB1 due to the work ethic and football IQ that he shows. Both quarterbacks are expected to get reps in the preseason as nothing is finalized yet. In the end, I see Russell coming out on top as Tomlin has always been one that favors experience, and I see Fields taking a backseat this season and learning more from Wilson and becoming the starter next season, as long as Wilson doesn't blow it out of the water as he's on a 1-year contract. As of right now, Wilson's ADP is 211 on Sleeper and 220th on ESPN. Fields' ADP is 223rd on Sleeper and 315th on ESPN. Whoever ends up taking over for the Steelers will have new offensive coordinator Arthur Smith to deal with, which doesn't bode well in terms of fantasy points for quarterbacks, as his scheme has been run heavy. Just look at his time with the Titans and with the Falcons. Wilson is ranked as QB 31 on Sleeper, 27 on ESPN, and 25 in mine. While Fields, even though he's more talented than any of the guys around him, including Wilson, falls to quarterback 32 on Sleeper, 36 on ESPN, and 34 on mine, all due to the fact that it looks like he's going to be the backup for the foreseeable future. The last quarterback battle is the Denver Broncos. It's the only quarterback battle to feature 3 different quarterbacks. Head coach Sean Payton is a wild card in my book, never really knowing what the guy plans on doing or what his thought process is afterwards. All this said, he has consistently produced fantasy quarterbacks. Whoever does end up winning this battle does not have the most talented roster to work with, but they do have a great offensive-minded head coach and an all-right skill position set of players. If I were to take a stab at it, I think the winner is going to be Bo Nix. This is because Stidham was already on the roster and has the most experience in the system, yet Payton went and got 2 other quarterbacks, showing that there isn't much faith there, as we earlier had expected. Wilson, on the other hand, has the most playing experience of the 3, and while having a big arm, lacks the accuracy to go with it, which we know Payton cares a lot about accuracy. Bo Nix, though, according to general manager George Paton, has a lot of those things that Sean Payton wants in a quarterback. Nix averaged less than 10 yards a throw last season at Oregon, but also was not afraid to air it out when needed. He completed a lot of checkdowns. He also only had 3 interceptions all last season. He can scramble when needed. He's a complete package in Sean Payton's eyes. So basically, to lay it out, he's a super accurate quarterback that can throw a lot of short passes in succession with some accurate mid to deep passes sprinkled in. Basically, he's Drew Brees. He's this version of Drew Brees towards the end of his career with more youth and more athleticism. No wonder Payton wants him, and it shouldn't be a surprise if he ends up as the QB1 in Denver. Nix's ADP is 205th on Sleeper and 269th on ESPN. He's ranked as the QB 30 on Sleeper, ESPN, and in my rankings, while Stidham has an ADP of 655 on Sleeper and is not even listed by ESPN. He's unranked on both Sleeper and ESPN, but is ranked at quarterback 41 in my personal rankings, and Wilson is ranked on none of them. If you ever have any fantasy questions or need some advice, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll try to answer your questions in the mailbag section of my episodes. My email is flagrantfantasy, BELLER@gmail.com, flagrantfantasybeller@gmail.com. To wrap this episode up, I'm going to have my quarterback rankings listed as a downloadable link or as a view on the YouTube page so that you can see. I really want to thank you guys so much for listening to this first episode and hopefully tuning into future episodes. I do a lot of research. I really do love fantasy football. It's a big part of my life, and this has been something that I've been trying to work on for quite some time. So thank you, and I will see you guys next time.